Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs is an American economist, a leading voice on geopolitics, and a professor at Columbia University. Professor Sachs, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
I wanted to start out with a broad question on U.S. empire because over the year, at least, we have seen the U.S. Bombing, blackmailing, threatening, tariffing nations, destabilizing nations after nations across the world, and a lot of people are discussing about the decline of the US empire. So on one hand, that's going on the other hand, it's doing all kinds of activities. So if you could conceptualize for us, how would you describe the kind of activities the US imperial machine is doing at its late imperial phase?
Well, the U.S. is making a lot of trouble, a lot of destabilization, but it also is seeing its limits in many, many ways. The U.S. Is in relative decline, and when it comes to power, it's relative that counts. So definitely the U.S. Share of any particular category you would want to use of international trade, of finance, of overall economic output, of military weight. All of these are in relative decline. We've entered a multipolar world, but the United States still has a unipolar imagination in Washington. I would say a unipolar delusion. It's learning place by place, step by step, that it really has limits. Donald Trump, as an individual, is a psychologically unstable and not very bright person. And so the learning is very haphazard and difficult. But I would say the US institutionally is step by step coming to grips with the realities of China, Russia, India, uh, even Iran. I would very cautiously say the U.S. Seems to be learning don't attack. That's also not a good idea. So what we're seeing is indeed a late imperial stage, a mentality in the Washington security state that is confused, a bit flailing around because these limits are painful to a class that believes in America's rule of the world. We're seeing, therefore, a lot of instability, a lot of bullying and beating up on smaller countries. But we're also seeing some caution when it comes to the larger countries. Um, I would say it's an unstable moment, certainly.
And if you could tell us a little bit about the domestic sentiment about US foreign policy at this moment. We've seen tremendous mobilization against US policy on Palestine. If you could add the domestic response to the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president and also the ongoing looming war on Iran. How do the people, most people in the United States, feel about it?
Well, I think the first point is surprising as it might seem for a country that is so much involved in a lot of destabilization around the world. It's not the first topic of discussion, according to usual opinion surveys, which ask people what's important for you. Almost all of the top several issues are domestic issues. Uh, Affordability became the key word of the past year because living standards for average working class Americans have been stagnant or in decline for years, which is one of the phenomena that brought Trump to power. on two occasions because he promised he would solve that problem, which of course he's not going to do. But that was part of his political message, both in 2016, again uh, in 2020, and then in winning again in 2024, that he would solve the uh, income standard or living standard challenge. If you look at foreign policy attitudes, which rank way down in salience for American politics, the public in general is against wars. It's against adventurism. The attitude towards Israel changed dramatically in the last 3 years because Israel was taken for granted as a U.S. Ally and friend and a country to be supported. That disappeared in the Israeli genocide, understandably so, and especially among young people. I think there's no desire whatsoever in the American body politic to invade Venezuela or to uh, harass Canada or Mexico. There are small pockets of particular groups, uh, Venezuelan expats in southern Florida, that may even be swing voters in local elections or state level elections, but there's no support in the American public broadly for overseas adventures. And indeed, MAGA, Make America Great Again, the slogan of Trump, was meant to be that Trump would focus on United States issues and not engage in the kinds of regime change operations of the past. But of course, he doesn't hone to any standard whatsoever, including that one. The bottom line is there's no popularity of the foreign policy. Trump has very limited support internally. This is the year in which American troops were out on the streets of American cities, killing people, uh, killing people with videos of shocking brutality by these uh, immigration agents, so called. Uh, that is, together with the economics, absolutely the number one issue. And Trump's approval rating is, it varies poll to poll, but I would say 37, 38% is disapproval rating in the mid 50s, and the approval rating is definitely on the way down. It's not something that's going to recover. Trump has not one strategy that actually meets the real needs of his voters or his supporters. And so this is going to be a failed administration. And the question for all of us is, what's the way of failure? Out with the whimper or out with the bang? And that we are not able to foresee.
And some of the changes that the administration has brought about, both in foreign policy but also domestically, I'm thinking about the internalization of the security apparatus in a way that was never, not, I wouldn't say never seen before because there were the Jim Crow years and so on, but it has been very extensive in recent history now. The ICE agents roaming around, how the universities have been subjected to the vigilance and so on. Um, how much of these changes do you think are relatively permanent? By which I mean, even if Trump or the Republican Party loses tomorrow, how much of them would not go away or disappear very easily, and how much of them is like maybe temporary? If there is an alternative, it would just go away.
I think some parts are Trumpian, like the ICE agents on the streets of American cities, dragging people out of their homes, taking 5-year-old children, shooting people, basically in cold blood, as far as I'm concerned. Um, that I think is Trumpian, and it's championed by the outlandish people in this government, like his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, who's absolutely a proponent of fascistic violence, both at home and abroad. Absolutely shocking. It is not based on uh, broad support for this kind of activity, quite the contrary. On the other hand, there are elements of our scene which are permanent. State surveillance, for example. I don't think that's going away. It didn't start with Trump. It's not going to end with Trump. That is the security state. It's quite real. It is deeply unpleasant. Silicon Valley's power and authority for private surveillance, together with state surveillance, and it's a partnership, is very strong. And there's no uh, clear uh, path right now to ending that or bringing it under control. So I think that part of what we're seeing, the surveillance state, the increased use of digital means for tracking, monitoring, punishing, canceling, that is not immediately going away by any means. That is a structural issue that is pretty deep. The uh, absolutely outrageous parts, excuse me, I think we can attribute, at least to an extent, to the Trump gangsters, the Trump team, that absolutely are out to push limits as far as they can to see where the real boundaries are. They do pull back when they hit those boundaries so far, but they aim to push every boundary, and they're pushing a lot of them.
I wanted to come to Iran, given talks are going on. But last year in June, we saw 5 or 6 rounds of talks, then followed by bombing of Iran. A lot of people are very, very cautious about the talks because this can be just a deception to start the war again. Um, these talks have been presented as nuclear talks, but the package includes rolling back of their ballistic missile programs and so on and so forth, which Iran has said that that's not going to happen. Um, how do you, what is your reading of these talks? Do you think these are done in an honest, with all honesty, or do you think it's just a deception?
Well, when it comes to the U.S., there's no such thing as honesty. So I wouldn't say that this is a trusting set of talks. Uh, that category of behavior doesn't even apply to the United States in general, but certainly not under Trump. So both sides are in a very uncertain mode. The basic point is that the Zionist lobby in the United States is pushing, as it's pushed basically every year for 30 years, for war with Iran. That has been an unremitting push. That has been Benjamin Netanyahu's greatest dream. The United States has repeatedly gone to war on behalf of Israel, or at Israel's pushing. Iraq is the most famous example, but Syria, Lebanon, uh, Libya, these are all cases where Israel pushed and the U.S. Did things that were absolutely against the U.S. interest, as far as I'm concerned. So when it comes to Iran, there's a major lobby pushing for war. I think what's happening, though, that is the most significant is a combination of two facts. First, Iran is not Venezuela. It's not in America's backyard. It is not militarily weak. And it is not going to roll over and play dead for the United States. Um, so there is caution directly about Iran's military capability, its hypersonic missiles, which obviously pierced Israel's Iron Dome last June. That's one point. The second point that I think is important, again, I'm just guessing because we don't really know day by day right now what's happening. But I think Trump probably heard an earful from countries in the region, other countries. I would think Turkey, I would guess Saudi Arabia, I would think from President Putin, and I would think from President Xi, all of them saying to Trump, don't do this. This is dangerous. This is reckless. This could escalate. This is not in your interest. So we're very close to war. But on the other hand, there are signs that the United States is pulling back from what seemed to be uh, imminent. And I think that the reason the U.S. is pulling back is that it is hearing and judging its limits, like we were talking about just a few minutes ago. A war with Iran would be horrible and dangerous, not just for Iran, but for the United States. Uh, and so, in this regard, I think there's real caution. We had one day of talks. I've not heard any report of what's happened in detail, but both sides came out making a positive statement. Of course, that's not unique. That was true last summer as well. But my guess is that this is purely a guess, but my guess is that the Iranians said we're discussing one issue, the nuclear issue, and the U.S. Has basically accepted that. That's a limit, and I think that that probably was the result of the first day. And to my mind, if I not to overreach, but my guess is that there is caution in Washington that wasn't there a month ago because countries that Trump does regard as important for the United States, like the Saudis, like Turkey, like Russia, because there are a lot of issues with Russia right now. And I hope that there was the discussion on this with China as well. I suppose that was the case, that all of this has given pause on the US side. If it goes that way, it would be probably the brightest example of what I was suggesting earlier, which is that there are limits to US power that are not only obvious and true, but that are coming to be understood in Washington as well.
I wanted to quickly ask you about Venezuela, given we've been talking about realization of limits. Certainly, in some areas more and less so in other areas, and Latin America seems to be such case. Nevertheless, we haven't seen a full-blown invasion, at least yet, of Venezuela. They say that the U.S. administration says that they are in talks. Of course, it's tremendous coercion of all regards. What is your sense of what's U.S. strategy in Venezuela at the moment?
The broad strategy in Latin America is to, one way or another, through electoral intervention, through coercion, through subversion, to bring right-wing governments into power throughout Latin America. The U.S. is having some success in this right now. Oh, excuse me. That success cannot be denied. Um, One country after another is one way or another, I think, often false election counts or other means that the U.S. has in financing campaigns or in making promises affecting political outcomes. So the broader strategy is the United States installs right-wing regimes across Latin America. There are limits to that, certainly, but we've been there before in past decades where politics has swept one way or another in Latin America at the U.S. behest. So that's the broad strategy. The narrow strategy for Venezuela is to take over Venezuelan oil. And what's happened so far is a president was kidnapped, and a lot of claims have been made about U.S. control over Venezuela. And the government in Venezuela is being soft in responding, and it's saying most of the time we're discussing with the U.S. I think in this narrow sense, things are absolutely in limbo. Almost every place in the world tries to play out Trump right now because he's, as a personality, a psychologically unstable megalomaniac. And so everyone tries to say nice things. The main strategy that countries are using is to praise him, uh, but not to really make any serious concessions. With Venezuela, some of that's going on. Uh, at the same time, there's real coercion. But I think it's early days. If you ask my guess, a year from now, the United States does not run Venezuela. I don't think that this has really been the regime change that Washington says. I think that this is playing for time in Caracas, and probably time is more on their side than not. The United States just doesn't have the support, the stamina, the means, the budget, the motivation to invest deeply in regime change or in running another country right now. As I've said, it runs counter to all of the tensions inside the United States. It is not a diversion from those tensions. It just annoys people even more. Our budget situation is definitely not good. The public support for Trump is very weak. The will to run Venezuela, other than maybe in Marco Rubio's and Donald Trump's head, is zero in the United States. So we're just in a strange limbo right now. But if I had to guess, a year from now, Venezuela is a forgotten issue in the United States and it's off on its own, and it maybe selling more oil, and maybe Chevron has made more investments. Who knows? But nothing tremendous has happened. And the weird part of all of this is the U.S. invaded in order to take over Venezuelan oil. And what that seems to mean is that American companies can engage in Venezuela. But that could have been done simply by the United States dropping its own damn sanctions, which is what got the United States companies out of Venezuela in the first place. So the whole thing is has an element of tragedy and an element of farce to it. And we're not sure which of these is predominant at this moment.
And do you suspect that there might be more escalations against Cuba as well, if the thesis that the ideologues like Marco Rubio and the Cuba hawks uh, were the driving force rather than the oil companies, because Chevron had the concessions and ExxonMobil and others are still not showing any interest because they are very suspicious about the stability. So if the thesis was that it was for political reasons, then we can think about Cuba as the next move. After all, there are reports from observers on Cuba that the U.S. is already undergoing taking activities to destabilize Cuba in all sort of ways.
Well, first, the activities to destabilize Cuba go back to 1960. So we're in our 65th year of trying to bring down this government, which is, of course, shameless and shameful, absolutely disgusting. And they're obviously trying to basically starve Cuba into submission right now. I mean, literally so. Cut off all oil, cut off any resources. This is essentially quarantining Cuba. Again, as you could almost say as was done in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't want to push the analogy except to say the United States has been hostile to Cuba nonstop since Fidel Castro came to power, which is 65 years ago. So, in this sense, absolutely, they're going to try to bring down Cuba, and it could happen. Um, it could be that other countries in the region, Brazil, Mexico, and others, say no, you can't do this. Um, it could be that maybe even countries outside the US, Spain, or others might say no, you can't do this, in which case we'd have another test of US limits. But this is definitely an obsession and a political mark of our Secretary of State. This is Florida politics. This is Rubio trying to position himself for the presidency in 2029 and afterwards. So yes, there's no doubt an attempt to bring down the Cuban government. Um, it could work. It's unlikely to work, would be my probability assessment, but something like 70-30 against, not 99-1 against. In other words, Cuba's quite fragile right now because of the usual US pressures and then the intensity of the Trump Rubio attempts and the Venezuelan situation.
My last question, Professor Sachs, if I may, I wanted to ask you about the US economy, some of the things you mentioned about affordability and so on. The aggregate economy is doing pretty bad. Even the growth is, if it's 2% and 33% is driven by the top 7, 10 stocks, then aggregate growth would be very, very less, maybe 1.6%. Sectorial growth has been very bad. Agriculture is almost in doldrums. A lot of that has been created by the tariff itself. Um, Housing, student loans, multiple areas, there seems to be no remedy. Um, if you were to advise the lawmakers or those who run the country,
That'd be something different.
yes, what would be some of the issues, economic issues that should be solved, and what should be the strategy?
The strategy for the United States is the same as the strategy for China or India or any other country, which is that economic well-being is a long-term proposition. It's not a whimsical set of tariffs that go up and down. It's not a switch that one turns on or off. And it depends on broad-based well-being in the society, not on the top 1% of 1% of 1%. That is not on the billionaires, not on the tech moguls, not on the success of one sector or another, but on the broad investments in the well-being of the population. In the United States, we've not had such investments for decades. What's happened in the US is that the US economy, broadly speaking, did well for professionals, for science-based sectors, for capital rather than labor in general because of automation and technology. So the national income shifted from labor compensation to capital, and within the labor compensation to high skilled work, basically professional work. The working class in all of this has seen their living standards, as I say, stagnant or declining. And that's been true for decades. And neither political party addressed this because both political parties in the United States feed off of big donors and feed off of helping those donors to have monopolies in their sector, overpriced healthcare, or overpriced other parts of the economy, or pro Wall Street, or pro the big food industry, which is not very safe for American health. So all of this has been non addressed for decades. Trump's strategy was to say to the workers, you're in miserable condition, and I'm going to save you. And I'm going to save you by draining the swamp at home, and I'm going to save you by pulling out of foreign adventures, and I'm going to save you by tariffs and taking on all those who are hurting you, the migrants who are doing you in, or China who is doing you in. Well, the problem with all of that is that the diagnosis is fatuous. Trump's analytical diagnosis of why there's stagnation for the working class and what to do about it is not about the migrants. It's not about China. It's about the structure of our economy. It's about the automation of jobs now accelerated with AI. It's about the failures of investing in infrastructure. It's about the local financing of education, which means that poor people do not get the kind of education and skills that were needed over the last 50 years and that will be needed in the future. But Trump's diagnosis is completely fatuous, and so he can't solve anything. This is the most basic point. This means he will not be successful politically or in any substantive way in the economy. And what ails the US requires 10 to 20 years of investment. This is what development economics is really about, is longer term investment. But we have a president in power with an attention span of 15 minutes or a tactics of 15 minutes. He wants glory every 15 minutes. Investment, absurd. It's the opposite of his entire life. But more than that, the political parties don't guide this either, because they're basically on the handout for big money. So we have Silicon Valley running the show. It has had a good stock boom. That does not translate into well-being for the American people. Trump likes to point to the stock market. It's irrelevant for the vast majority of the American people and what they feel in their paycheck or lack of jobs or the kind of job that they're doing, which is not the kind of job that they aspire to do. So all of this means that the real investment focus is absent in the US. One more point. We are necessarily globally moving to green technologies, meaning that the climate crisis is very serious, far advanced, and requiring a change of technologies. Electric vehicles, for sure. Renewable energy, for sure. These are not ifs or options or left versus right. These are just realities. But the United States under Trump is doing exactly the opposite of these. Our automakers are saying, we're getting out of electric vehicles. We can't compete with China. We're going back to internal combustion engines. This is a death sentence. It's a suicide. Trump is turning off all of the renewable energy projects. He doesn't like wind power. He doesn't like solar power. Okay, back to coal. This is a death sentence. So what we're doing is handing the manufacturing and industrial leadership over to Asia. Okay, I like Asia. That's fine. But the United States is doing itself tremendous damage, because if you look out 10 years, where's our export competitiveness? Well, it's not in vehicles, I'll tell you. It's not in fossil fuels, I'll tell you. So you see broad swaths of America's current exports that have no future. And nobody in Washington right now is addressing any of this. Trump, of course, the least.
Trump would throw around numbers tied to the phrase investment, but uh, neither these numbers are feasible, nor I think he doesn't understand what investment is because he thinks about cash flow as investments.
Yes, and by the way, every number is phony. If you want to be Trump's friend, I'll give you $10 trillion in the future. That's wonderful. So this is a bunch of vapor. It means nothing. Those numbers.
I went to an electronic industry in China, and one of those managers, he had a shareholding in the company, small shareholding. He said that if you want to make money in this segment, the market has become so competitive that you will have to wait for 8 to 9 years to start making some of those returns. You talk to people in the US, they will think about making money overnight, and that's the difference between the finance
Yeah,
capital and kind of
that's
industrial
it.
capital.
Yeah, for them, making money means a good IPO. It doesn't mean actually having a product that is going to have a cash flow for the next 25 years.
We'll leave it there, Professor Sachs. Like always, this was a very fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.